Hey, if I were to classify NBA basketball players, you could separate them into positions like center, power forward, small forward, guard, point guard, shooting guard, stretch 4, stretch 5. Oh man, that wouldn't totally work. You could separate them by points per game, but that doesn't tell the whole story. You could separate them by assists, rebounds, offensive rebounds, defensive rebounds. How about player efficiency rating? You could do that. There's a number of ways, or you could just say, here's Steph Curry, and here's everybody else. There's so many ways to classify NBA basketball players. And there are even more ways that you could classify 8.7 million species of organisms. How do you classify? How do you group them together? Well, the study of that is called taxonomy. That's what this unit is about. And basically, the taxonomy is the science of classification. People are working at this still today. We discover new types of organisms, new species every year. Many of them, in fact, and we've got to figure out a way to classify them using all the knowledge that we have, not just what they look like or their physical characteristics, but how they might be related to other organisms that are already classified. So yeah, this study is taxonomy. Don't get it confused with taxidermy. That's a completely different term. It's basically how you stuff the head of that 30-point buck that you shot last winter or something during season. So it's not taxidermy, it's not stuffing dead animals. This is the science of classification. It's used to name and organize living things in a meaningful way. This is something that everyone in the world can follow and can add to, in fact, if the right information is gathered. So to classify organisms, all 8.7 approximately million of those, there's a real value to that. The video that I'll put in the show notes kind of briefly describes how a museum like the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, how they would take all these specimens and then tell the story of classification from that, and it's pretty interesting. But it is complex. This is maybe the first attempt at classification or taxonomy by Aristotle. You'll see that if you look closer, he's got it separated into animals and plants. Unicellular organisms weren't even really a thought back then. But it is quite primitive, yet it did something for the people that were trying to classify organisms thousands of years ago. Since then, it has changed quite a bit, thanks to this guy named Carolus Linnaeus, back in the 18th century. So in the 1700s, this guy from Sweden had a better way. He classified organisms by their physical characteristics and all that was known back then. And he came up with this system that we still use today. And it involves binomial nomenclature, which sounds complex, but it's not really. It's just there's two names that every species of organism that we know of is classified by. There's two names, like the human is a Homo sapien. The first name, in our case, the Homo sapien, is the Homo part, is the first name refers to the genus that we belong to or that organism belongs to. The sapiens part is the second name, and that refers to the species, so it's even more specific than the genus name was. We still use this today with every organism that we come across, even plants. The common name of this tree right here is a white oak. The scientific name, using binomial nomenclature, would be Quercus alba. Here is the genus name. There is the species name, which is more specific than that genus. Rules to remember when using this binomial nomenclature is to, well, they're all in Latin. The genus is always capitalized. The species name is not capitalized. And it's always good to italicize it, or if it's written, I guess you would underline it. But we don't do much of that these days anymore. Okay, so how are these relationships determined? One way is structural similarities, the obvious things that, or physical characteristics that we can easily observe are good to look at. We can also look at behavior when we're trying to figure out the phylogeny or the relationship between one organism and another. Biogeography, so where do we find these animals? Biochemistry would involve what these animals at the basic structure, what are they made of? Comparative embryology, that would be like what do they look like before they are actually born, when they're still in the embryonic stages. And then fossil evidence. So all of these things contribute to how we would classify them, their phylogeny. The relationship between like a house cat and a tiger. It's important to try to get those relationships down, and we use obviously a lot of information that is gathered to form that, or that view that of what is related to what. A visual way that we can show a phylogenetic relationship between organisms is called a cladogram. You can see a couple of examples here. Basically, if you start at the bottom, and this was millions and millions of years ago, but the lower you go on a cladogram, generally, if it's structured this way, is further and further back in time. And at certain points, there are divergent tracks where one species became different than another enough to become a different group or species of animal or plant or whatever organism you're classifying. So this, you can see that certain types of dinosaurs on this cladogram are more closely related or had a common ancestor that was not back so far in time. And then some others are more distantly related, even within a group of animals such as dinosaurs, which eventually evolved into birds. So cladograms are something that you might see and become familiar with. Hopefully you will become familiar with it. Here are some things that I do want you to remember. Classification groups. We could start with domain. I'll get to that later, but what I'd like you to remember is going from more general to specific. Starts with kingdom, then phylum. This would be like, does it have a backbone or not, if we're in the animal kingdom. So like an animal kingdom, the phylum could be vertebrata or chordata. They have a backbone, and then from there you separate into classes like mammals, reptiles, amphibians, etc., birds. So class, and then order, and then families that are even more specific than order, and then finally you get to the group of related species or genus, and then the species, which is the smallest and most specific. So kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. If that doesn't just roll off your tongue naturally, I would use this mnemonic device pictured over here. King Phil came over for great spaghetti. You could go with that. Or you can make up one of your own, as long as you can remember that from most general to the most specific, it goes kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So yeah, King Phil came over for great spaghetti. Could be a mnemonic device that you use here. All right. Even more general than kingdom, there are domains. They're even more distantly related from one to the other. There are three of them. Bacteria, archaea, and eukarya, which we would belong to, and every other animal, plant, and fungi around. So bacteria are unicellular prokaryotes with cell walls that contain peptidoglycan. We'll learn more about why that's important later. And we'll learn more about bacteria and archaea, which is another domain. It's another tiny, microscopic, unicellular prokaryote, meaning it doesn't have a nucleus, that does not have peptidoglycan in the cell wall. So that's one little difference, but both of those unicellular prokaryote organisms, and there are a bunch of species of each in those domains, both of those are quite different than eukaryotes. These are organisms that have cells with nuclei. These do not. Okay, so they don't have a nuclei or other membrane-bound organelles. These other two domains, eukaryotes do. So the domain eukarya includes organisms with nuclei and membrane-bound organelles. Here's a different look at the three domains. Here's the domain, or here's the classification level and some other information on this picture. And then bacteria and archaea kind of are their own kingdom. They only have one kingdom within that domain. And then the eukaryotes are split into protists, fungi, plants, and animals. So we are going to learn about all three domains, all of these kingdoms of animals in the next coming weeks, and we should get to do a lot of fun stuff with it. But first we're learning about how are these organisms classified. Adios.